All right, we're back with the Talk Like No One's Listening podcast, episode 27. 27 Club. So for today's episode, I don't know what I'm talking about exactly. I never know fully. I usually just start with a starting point, something that might have been floating around in my head, and then I just start talking and it all comes out and I figure it out as I'm doing it. Today I have a little bit of a list of some notes of some things that I've been thinking about. Very general ideas that I'll expand on as I'm talking, as I'm saying them. I mean, as I'm thinking, I'm talking. So we're about to find out together whatever it is that I have to say. I will start off with something audio engineering related, since that's how I started this podcast. I started having this be the topic and have it be things related to what I do professionally in music. And then maybe, I don't know how many episodes it's been now, but it's been a few that I've done. Maybe the last 4 or 5 episodes, I haven't really been talking about music and engineering and technical things, because honestly, it's just what I do all the time. So I don't really have much interest or motivation to have a long conversation by myself about it. It's pretty boring to me. But I understand that it can be useful to other people that are interested in the subject to hear about some insight and experiences and wisdom that I might have to share. So I offer it up to those who might be interested. Here we go. Mixing. I've been doing some mixing the past couple months, and more recently, I did a good amount of mixing for an album, and it was an album that I've been the recording engineer for. So it is now August 13th, but I spent, since the beginning of this year, been working on this album for an artist. Not hard to guess who it is, but I've been working on the album as the recording engineer since the very beginning of this year. It's been very intense, a lot of hours, a lot of work went into it. And when it came to the end of the album to finish it all up, I didn't expect to be doing any mixing, because on the last album that we did last year, we were so busy and working so much up until the very end deadline that it wasn't possible for me to do mixing, because we were still in the studio recording and editing and making changes up until the very last day. And every time we would make a change, we would send the new files and updates to the person that was mixing. So it was this overlap process. And the only way that album last year got done at the time that it was done was to do it in this way. And the same thing was happening for what we just finished this year. So I assumed it would be a similar situation where it just wouldn't be practical for me to do any mixing. But then I was asked to do mixes. So I ended up mixing 6 out of 17 songs. And the album is not out yet, so I don't want to talk about specifically what it is, but I want to talk about things that I learned, insights that I had, because that's the thing about music and doing music professionally and what applies just to life. And that's a big part of it's a reoccurring theme that I always have talking about is that all these things that I've learned from my career really just apply it to life. And that's the one thing that I find interesting about a career like this. Any type of freelance career that's a creative field, it's all in your hands. You don't have a company that you work for, you don't have a salary, you don't have like a weekly schedule and retirement plan and all those standard things that most people have when they have a job and a career. But when you're freelance and you're just out there, out in the wild, and you have to, in a sense, fend for yourself, and you have to be self-sufficient, the things that you do to survive your career end up being the things that are making you survive in life in general, because you are relying all on yourself to be able to have a career that will support yourself. And if you don't do the work that you need to do yourself, there's no one else to do it. You can't just have a cushy position that you get to just ride out until retirement. It doesn't exist in this field. There's either you just work hard as fuck all the time, or you fall off. That's pretty much what it is. And it's not even just working hard as fuck. A lot of people work hard as fuck, but you have to make smart decisions for yourself also, as far as what types of jobs you're gonna do, what type of people you wanna work for, you have to think long term about where do you wanna be in 5 years, 10 years, etc. And what are the steps that are gonna be necessary to help you move in that direction. Because I spent a lot of time earlier in my career not really having a long-term plan. I was just happy to be doing what I was doing. And then, of course, what happened was I just found myself in situations where I felt stagnant and I didn't have a path forward to any future that looked promising to me. So once I realized that I was gonna be stuck if I didn't take action, and maybe not even physical action, but just in your mind, change your mindset and start thinking about what it is that you want to do and who you want to be, and start living every day with the mindset of that type of person. Like, you have to be who you want to be in your mind first, and then the world around you follows and slowly becomes that. Easier said than done, of course. But bringing it back to what I was talking about, mixing for this album, I found it a bit challenging because like I said, I was the recording engineer for this project. So it's now August. We just finished a few weeks ago. So let's say from the beginning of the year till end of July. So 7 months straight, I was just working like crazy. And I was honestly burnt out. So to go through this whole process, work, get burnt out, and then be asked to mix, I was glad to have the opportunity to do that, but I just didn't realize where my head was at until I had to start mixing. And then I started listening back to what I was mixing. I was getting feedback from the others that were working on the project about my mixes, and I just realized I was just way off on that first pass because my head wasn't really in it properly. I wasn't looking and hearing objectively enough. I was very much tainted by the experience of working on the album and just being so burnt out on it and hearing these songs for so many times that it was hard to hear them for what they were and what they are and what they needed to be. When it came to mixing and finalizing these songs, and the other songs were mixed by a very
well-known mix engineer, and I don't think I heard maybe just one of the songs that was mixed by this other engineer, and I knew that I had to really do my best work. Regardless, I had to do my best, but knowing that the other person mixing the other songs in the album is very well known in the world for mixing, so I knew I had to make sure that the songs that I mix stand up quality-wise to what this other person would be doing. So there was a bit of pressure for that. There's always pressure when you're mixing because it's just you just want to make it be the best that it can be, and that's not really an objective thing. You have to deliver to your client what it is that they want to hear. That may or may not be what you think is the best. So there's this in-between spot that you have to find, this nice balance of what they want and what you as the mix engineer think you can bring to the song, to the record, to make it sound perfect for what it is. And that has to do with understanding the identity of the record as if it's a person. Everybody's different. Everybody has wow, brain fart. Haven't had one of those in a while. But every song is unique and individual, just as people are. And I like to think about it that way when I'm making my decisions about what to do for songs, either on a production or engineering side. I just try to tap into what I feel is the true soul and personality of the song, so that way all my decisions that I'm making are in the best interest of the song. I don't like to treat songs the way some people might treat their kids. Some people have a very strict method of raising their kids, and they have like their whole life planned out for them, what schools they're gonna go to, what type of career they're gonna have, what type of person they wanna be married to. That's a very traditional way of thinking, but that's how a lot of people grew up, having a lot of their life planned out for them, and either they go with it or they rebel. But for people and for music, because it's kind of the same thing, I prefer to pay attention to the identity
of each individual song and person and look at it for what it is and try to help it become its true self, the best form of its true self that it can be. That being said, I didn't have my head on straight when I first started mixing, and I was just going through the motions of mixing like I was on autopilot, like I was
a human version of Lander. Ooh. But then I woke up. I had to just center myself, bring it back together, level my head, clear my ears out, start listening to other music, because I hadn't been doing that in a while. When I get really busy with work and I'm feeling burnt out, I don't want to hear music at all, so I don't listen too much. But I think when you're mixing, it's good to do that because you need to calibrate your ears. You need to hear what other songs, professionally mixed and mastered songs, how they sound and how they feel sonically. So you get a feel of what's the range of too much or too little when it comes to frequency, balance of the music, as far as drums to guitars to bass to keys to vocals to all things. Getting a feeling of what comparable songs in the genre that you're trying to match, that you're the world that you're in, it's like, how do other songs out there in the world, how do they feel? And if you're mixing in on the regular, you probably don't need to do that, because for me, I just hadn't done any mixes before this because I was just recording. So if you're doing anything consistently, then you're better off if you're just doing consistently. So, but I wasn't. So I had to switch gears in my mind pretty quickly, and I think ultimately I got it done. Time will tell. I don't know. I always feel like uncomfortable about mixes, and I always feel like I'm turning them in with something that's hasn't been fully fleshed out yet, that maybe I know it or I don't know what it is yet, but maybe I feel like something's not quite right just yet, but time's up and you got to turn it in. And as long as the clients are signing off and they're saying it's cool, then what else are you going to do, really? But what always happens is once I'm done with the project, it comes out and some time has gone by, a month or two, and I've had it out of my mind, and I've had enough other things to do to replace it. So it's no longer in my head. I don't think of it as work, something that I got to work on. I can just listen to it on a streaming service, hear it, look at it as official music that's out there, released in the history books. It is what it is. You can't change it. Then I can hear it in a very different way and hear it a lot more objectively. And it always ends up sounding a lot better at that point for me. I usually listen to stuff, and most of the time I really don't have anything pressing that I feel like, I should have changed that. Oh, I should have adjusted this. I should have adjusted that. Most of the time everything sounds cool to me. It's just when you're in the process of mixing and you're just finished up, you're super critical. You just have your sensitivities turned way up for things that might throw you off, to sound like they're wrong or they just need to be adjusted. But once you stop caring about that and you just try to enjoy it as music for what it is, enjoy it the way everybody else is enjoying it, then it gets a lot easier to listen to like that. And a lot of times when I am being super critical and I do listen to other music for reference, I do have this weird thing where I listen to the songs that I've listened to like hundreds of times, and then when I listen to it to try to compare it mix-wise, and I really listen to it very critically, it ends up sounding like those songs that I thought were perfectly fine all these years sound like they have a shitty mix on them. And I don't know if it's because they actually do have a shitty mix, or because I just turned up my critical hearings like to such the highest level that everything sounds bad to me. So that's a weird place to be. So you always gotta just know when your ears are just playing with you, because it's all just perception and subjectivity and perspective. So I just have to realize that is another thing, that 99.9% of people out there in the world, they're not listening to music in a super critical way, trying to find out what's messed up with this mix. They're just listening to music to enjoy it and just hear it for what it is, and they're not being that critical of the sonics. Only people, a select few, very, very small minority of people in the world hear music the way that a music professional does, and it's a gift and a curse. You can appreciate something for being great, but then when something is not good, it's so apparent that you just can't ignore it sometimes. But you have to, because some of my favorite music ever of all time when I was growing up is all stuff that isn't engineered very well, like classic hip hop and some rock music, punk rock, like reggae, like a lot of stuff. It's what you would call lo-fi, but lo-fi in itself is a certain quality and it has a certain character that for the certain types of songs is perfect. So yeah, it's confusing because a lot of times it just goes out the window. Any type of guidelines or rules that you could make about music, and yeah, you gotta know. when to say fuck it and just no rules, who cares? But in the end, like I said, I think these songs turned out fine. They sounded like what they needed to sound like for the client, for them to be happy, and then for me to hear it and feel like they sound like what I feel like they need to sound like, and I'm satisfied with that. So, regardless, it's too late. The album's done. There's no changing it now. That's always the thing you have to deal with. That's the struggle, is that you have to commit your decisions, because ultimately the songs have to be done. They need to be finished, otherwise you can't put them out. And what's the point of making music and not putting it out? Even though that happens a lot. A lot of people don't think about this, but all the music that you hear in the world that's officially released music of all time, it's only a small percent of the total music that's actually created in the world. Most people, artists and bands and whatnot, when they make an album, they make a lot of songs, and then they just pick from the best ones to be on their album. And some people vary, depends on how much time and money they have. And when it comes to the pop world, where it's not artists that are making the music themselves, that are writing and producing their own music, a lot of pop artists, all they're doing is just singing a song that somebody else, singing a song that some other people wrote and produced. They're just putting their vocals on it. So what happens in that type of world, you have a lot of professional pop songwriters and producers that just make songs every day and they just make songs and make them, and they're trying to sell them and get a signed artist or whoever to want to use the song. And then if everything goes well, the people that are in charge of a certain artist, managers, A&Rs, label, whatever, can get their artist to record the song, and then it does come out. Like, there's a lot of steps in order to get that far. But
so many songs in this way get made that never find a home. Either they're just not that great of songs, or sometimes they just never find a home. It's just never the right time. It could be a perfectly good song, and just for the time, especially when pop music, it's always about what is right for now. There's not a lot of pop artists and major labels that take risks by putting out music that don't fit the times. Even though it might be a great song, they might feel like, it feels a little too old, it feels a little too dated, or it feels a little too new, like
it's a little too next level. I don't know if people are gonna understand this. That happens too. So it's a very fine balance of being a songwriter and producer in that way, of trying to get songs placed. It's a skill in itself to know. Some people just get lucky, I don't know, but it's a skill in itself to know what is the pulse of right now musically, to know what types of songs are gonna work for right now, because ideally you want it to move fast. You want to be able to make a song that can be heard by the right people to decide that this song will be great for such and such artist, and we need to put it out now, because now is the time that this sound is the sound that people want. So yeah, you gotta act quick. Sometimes though, it depends. Sometimes songs can sit around for a while and age well, and then eventually find a home later and sound like they're fresh. So, mixing, I found myself, like I said, being on autopilot, and I found myself doing way too extra, way too much, too many steps, too many adjustments, too many corrections, too much. I just over mixing. and not being consciously aware of all the steps that I'm taking, and realizing that I'm just doing more than I need to. It just in my head, that, like I was saying, because I was so burnt out on these songs in my head, because I didn't like hearing them, because I just heard them way too much. I just felt like I had to do a lot to change them, to make it sound like something that I do want to listen to. But I ended up just overcorrecting and changing the feel of the song, and that's really, most of the time when it comes to mixing, that's not what you want to do. You don't want to change the feel of the record. Most people, they have it for the most part dialed in when they send it off to get mixed. So you just need to enhance it and make it still sound and feel like what it is, but it's just a more polished, pristine version of that, more balanced. And for one of the other mixes that I did happen to hear from the other engineer, they weren't very different from what the rough mix sounded like before it went to get mixed. And at first, I was thinking, they didn't really do anything. Is this just laziness? Are they just cheating? What's going on? And then part of it was I realized, well, you don't always have to do something when you're mixing. Engineering in general, like, you don't always have to be doing something. It's just like the same thing with playing and writing music. It's not just about the notes that you play, it's about the notes that you don't play, also equally important. So for an engineer also, it's the engineering decisions that you make to change something are just as important as the ones when you decide, I don't need to do anything right now. I don't need to do anything to a particular instrument or a vocal. It can be what it is. It's like how it sounds is fine. It doesn't need to be touched and adjusted. And that's a hard thing to do, to find that balance. Because you feel like as an engineer, that's your job, that's your role, is to find the things that need to be fixed. So sometimes you just go overboard, you just overfix, because when you're, like they say, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, but you're not a hammer. You're a human. So you have to think like a human. And it's hard. It's hard to know when you're not really thinking. When you get caught up in this autopilot mode of life, it's hard to know
that you're in it, that's the mode that you're operating on. So you gotta snap yourself out of it. You gotta catch yourself and recalibrate yourself, readjust.
So, what I'm saying is that in this process of mixing, I still had to go about it like, I don't know what I'm doing. I had to have that realization that, oh, what am I doing? I don't even know. I need to pull myself together and start to think about, what am I doing? What is mixing? And then I started to realize I overmix all the time, and I just get away with it. Only I know. Sometimes it's not bad, because what happens where I feel like when you're overmixing and you're just really changing the character and the feel of the record, but it ends up being good, I think it kind of overlaps into you being a producer. Like, you're kind of co-producing the song through the mix. Yeah, you're changing the feel of it, but sometimes it is for the better. And I've just done it and gotten away with it. Some people, some clients, some artists, producers, whatever, they may not be so critical when it comes to the mix. So you can present them something like that and they'll be cool with it. They might not notice how different it actually became, but I say you have to be cautious with that. Most people don't want you to do that unless you have some type of established working relationship with them and they know that they can trust you to take their record and work on it more and change the feel and progress it in a way that you feel is better, and they'll trust you on that. But if you don't have that relationship, that's risky business. But at all times in life and in music, you always have to be learning. You can never settle and assume that you've got it all figured out and you know what you're doing. If you just always feel like you don't know what you're doing, that means you will always keep learning. And if you keep learning, you keep growing and you keep living. And that's how I like to go about it, you know? Ah, these chickens. Reverse chickens. So, I made an episode a while back, maybe this was last year or something. It was called Don't Say And ever since I made that episode and I talked about that idea, it's really stuck with me. And it's a thing that I continue to practice. As you can hear, I try my best to not say And what happens now is because it's been a thing for myself that I've been critical of myself when it comes to speaking publicly like this. It stands out so much for me when I hear other people speaking, like anywhere, anybody speaking and they're saying a lot. It's become my pet peeve. And especially people that are public speaking on the regular. People that have to be on TV, do interviews, journalists, people that are CEOs of companies talking to their employees, like whatever the case may be. I hear people saying a lot. And to me, it bothers me because I feel like it's such a small thing to fix, but it makes such a big difference. But it's a matter of awareness. The thing with me is it brought my awareness went to this idea because I started doing this podcast and I started listening back to myself talking for an hour and hearing myself say consistently. It just bothered me and it just, to me, sounded unprofessional. And even though I'm doing this saying that I'm talking like no one's listening, in the back of my head, I just thought, well, just in case somebody does listen, I want to sound like I'm a professional speaker, podcaster, even though, what is that? But at least part of what I expanded on with that idea of that episode was that there's something bigger to it by not saying And I think, I don't know if I'm gonna end up repeating myself what I said in the episode, but it's just been in my head, so that's why I wanted to talk about it again. For me to hear so many other people saying all the time that are publicly speaking, what it sounds like to me, the way I interpret it, is as if it's a bad signal. Like when you're on the phone with somebody and the signal keeps cutting out and you're not hearing words
and you're trying to really pay attention and talk with them, but it's hard to keep following them because there's this like static or a glitch or the signal drops out or something like that. That's what it feels like to me when I'm hearing somebody interrupt their own speech
with them saying consistently. And I feel like if you have something important to say, like what I do see people that are trying to share some information in an interview or a podcast or a speech, and they have something serious and important to say, but then they're saying they're deteriorating the quality of the signal of their communication. And why I think that matters is because one part of why the world is so crazy right now is that people have a lot of people have a very low quality in the signal of their communication. Meaning they have thoughts in their head that they want to communicate to other people, but the thoughts in the head don't get accurately communicated to other people because there is a problem with the signal quality. So what the receiving person gets may not be the full message that the person is intending to share. And speaking is one of them. It's not like when someone says you think is a different word and you're taking a totally different meaning. It's not changing the meaning of what they're saying, but what it is saying is it's making it harder for them to stay engaged in what that person is speaking about. Now, one thing that people will say about someone like Obama, how he was such a good speaker and so engaging, and he can keep people really focused on every word that he says, is because he is a skilled public speaker. What he does is never says maybe not never, but when he's really up there on the stage or on TV or whatever, and he's really talking, it's prepared, but it's controlled, it's disciplined. He speaks with speech patterns. I mean, that's kind of what I'm modeling for myself, is because what happens when you just have the urge to say and you just don't say anything instead of saying it becomes a pause, but then it makes it seem like everything you're saying is very deliberate and thought out. Which it is, because that's what happens when you use your awareness to focus on not saying that means you're focusing on your own words and the thoughts that you have and how they end up being words coming out your mouth. So it's a way for you to speak and communicate your thoughts better and translate thoughts into words much more clearly, so that what you want to say out to the person listening is much more understandable. And one problem I see in the world that is maybe a symptom of byproduct, whatever, of side effect of social media is that all the thoughts that people have that they want to communicate to the world are being smushed down into tiny little bits, because people are trying to take these big ideas about what's happening in the world and in life, and they're putting it into social media posts. With Instagram, it might just be a picture of something, a few pictures, and a quoted text below. Or on Twitter, it's just words, and you can post a link or something in some photos. But what I'm saying is, a lot of communication is being truncated. It's being scaled down to something very simple. It's like taking a full resolution color photo and then you're lowering the resolution so that the person that sees that photo, they're really only seeing a small slice of what you're trying to show them, and they might not get it, what it is that you're trying to show them. And they also might interpret it wrong because they're going off of a smaller bit of information. It's like we see constellations and we see shapes and characters and animals and all these things in the constellations that people, for the most part, all agree that they look like what they look like. But what are you really looking at? You're just looking at a few points in the sky. You're not actually seeing a scorpion. There's no actually a bull out there in the sky. You're just seeing dots. There's no actual real Big Dipper. But our brains fill in the blanks and interpret things that aren't really there. And that applies to everything else in our lives, the way our brains work. We get certain bits and points of information, and our brains connect dots and fill in the blanks, and then you have a picture, and then you have an idea, you have a perception, you have an opinion. And if you're getting all your info from social media like everybody is, if you're not collecting many points of information from many different sources, it's very easy to have a skewed perspective, an inaccurate perspective on things. And what I've been seeing as being the big conflict between people recently with something like the conflict between people that support Black Lives Matter and the people that say, oh, all lives matter. And they're getting so mad at each other that people are getting mad for the wrong reason. They ultimately, if they could be two people face to face having a calm conversation and they talked about how they felt, they would probably agree more than they disagree. But because you're boiling these very complex social ideas and situations into a catchphrase, people are missing out on what the actual discussion and conversation is. So you end up arguing apples to oranges. Like you're not even talking about the same thing. And then because it just keeps going, the fight continues online in social media, then it gets more intense. And then people just start thinking that, oh, if they see these 3 words on your page in a post, it could be these 3 words or the other 3 words. Or another set of 3 words, Blue Lives Matter. Then it's like, oh, then people really go crazy. But that's what they're going crazy over and fighting over is 3 words that are meant to represent the infinite complexity of life. So stupid. That's why I stay away from all that stuff. I have a way that I feel about what's happening in the world, but I'm not trying to put it out there like that because I don't think that helps. At the same time, I'm not trying to pretend like I know what I'm talking about. I'm not out there in the streets experiencing these things that are happening. I'm not seeing it with my own eyes. It's not my experience to really speak on. I don't want to assume that I have a position or place to authentically and accurately speak on what's happening. So I don't, because I don't know. Especially now. I just know what's happening in my house, because that's it. I'm in my house every day, just like everybody else. So I'll get online and I'll tell you about the issues I'm facing within the social construct of my house. I'll tell you about the injustices of my bathroom. I'll tell you about the legalization of crystals in my bedroom. But even that's pretty dumb, so no one cares about that. Anyways, I keep it pretty minimal when it comes to social media. I really don't have... It's not that serious to me. A lot of people, their social media world is like, it's like their real life. But for me, it's not real life. It's literally just a thing you do on your phone for entertainment to pass the time. So I'm that is what it is, and then when I'm in my own life living it, I just try to live it. So yeah, it's hard. It's weird. I do pay attention to all the things that are happening socially and on social media and all the different things that go back and forth. People argue and fight over, whether it's political, social, economic, scientific, cultural. There's so many things where people are just wanting to fight and argue about everything. And a lot of times they just take it so far because it becomes a team sport. And that doesn't work because we're not a separate team. We're all in the same team. And because people act like they're separate teams, that's why nobody wins. That's why we don't win, because we're not on the same team, because we're divided on so many different levels. And we want our team to win, the team that we identify with, whether it is like literally a sports team, you're just a hardcore fan of your sports team. So anyone that's like whoever the arch enemy team is, you automatically hate those people. Strangers you never met just because they like a different sports team. Or red and blue. You're on the red side, so you hate the people on the blue side. You're on the blue side, so you hate the people on the red side. That applies to both Bloods and Crips, Republicans, Democrats. And when it comes to that, just wanting your team to win, that means nobody wins. We only all win is when we all are on the same team. And I just see so many people, they think from the perspective of identifying with the team that they're on. And it's even just like the identity of your ethnic or cultural. You feel like you are part of this cultural group, ethnic group, so you have to be in line with their views and their values, and you represent and you speak from that. But that's not always what's correct or accurate or true, or I don't know. For me, I just try to not identify with anything. I don't identify with nationality, ethnicity, religion, political party, my career. I don't really choose to live and think that way, because the way I see it is those are all things that are, most of those things are just social constructs. They're just things that people invented, ways of thinking that were invented, and then people just agreed with it and went along with it. There's things that are part of nature. The sun is hot, water is wet, gravity pulls you down to the ground. I identify with those things because, all right, we're here as humans living in this world. Okay, those things aren't changing. But what you believe in religiously, politically, socially, economically, those are all just made up things in people's minds. So that can change. So let's change it. That's how I feel. None of this is permanent as far as how we live socially as humans on the planet. Like I said, we need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to have water, you need some sunlight, you need air, okay? There's no arguing that. There's no negotiating that. But you can negotiate and argue of what's a better way for people to live. Just the individual. What's the best way that just everybody on the planet can just be not having a shitty experience? I don't have the answer for that, but a lot of people have shitty experiences in life based on rules and laws, standards, guidelines that are just invented by people that came before them. So I don't like to follow anything in that way. I think everybody has to, hey, if you want to follow guidelines, whatever, that's your choice. But I think it's important to also try and think for yourself. And just think without anybody else's outside influence on you. Try to think for yourself. What's good for you? What's good for people in general? What's right? What's wrong? What's just? What's unjust? What's mean? What's nice? I think we need a lot more of that. But that's not what gets taught. That's not what gets passed down from older generations to younger generations. Older generations are always just trying to get the young generation to mimic them as much as possible so that the whole world that they've built for themselves for their own personal gain keeps existing so that they can continue to personally gain, or their team, their family, their whatever. With everything happening in the world, it's probably the craziest year ever in my life. I'm 39, so I think it's pretty clear to say that this is the craziest year ever. And it's so much craziness constantly happening everywhere, on a local level, national, global, in your personal life. Just so much crazy shit happening all the time. It's hard to follow everything because you just can get so overwhelmed, because I don't really think our brains are meant to deal with this much information all the time. And when it comes to trying to make sense of it all, sometimes there's just no sense to be made because it's just too complex. Life is infinitely complex, but because of technology and the internet, we are able to absorb so much more information than ever before. But what we're able to put back out into the world as far as like our thoughts and our speech and communication is like very small. So we have all this stuff coming into our brain. We're trying to think about it, trying to process it. And then maybe you want to say something, you want to post about it on social media, and then it's like 2 sentences. You're just taking the infinite complexity of life and you're putting it into 2 sentences, or just a hashtag, and then what does that do? I don't know. It's like this line from that song Liquid Swords by the Jizza. He has one line that I always thought about. I never really thought about what it could mean, but I just know the lyric, and it's a wide entrance, small exit, like a funnel. And that popped into my head when I was thinking about this, that our minds have a wide entrance for a lot of information and input to enter. It's a free-for-all right now. But what comes out from our mind on the other end is a tiny little hole. And it should be wide on both sides, don't you think? Yeah, right? So, one thing I mentioned about looking at all these different points of data and having your mind connect dots and fill in the blanks, it can be very confusing when there's just so much going on. And I've had several moments during this lockdown period where I'm laying in bed and everything just floods my mind about my life and the world and all this shit that's happening, and it just floods my mind and I just get overwhelmed and
I have no idea what to do or how to make sense of it all. And after that had happened several times, I just realized I had to unplug, I had to let go and just not care so much.
I do want to know what's going on in the world, because especially for things that are related to like lockdown, I want to know what's the latest, because I have a family. I want to know if I need to pack up and leave town because this situation is getting super critical or whatever. Martial law. So, but I also realized you can't get too caught up. You can't get too invested in it. And I just realized all you can really do is just trust your own inner sight, your own intuition, and have that guide you. Trust on that to guide you throughout your days while life is so crazy as it is. For any of you that grew up in the 80s like me, it made me start thinking about this scene in the movie Bloodsport where Frank Dukes is fighting Chong Li. Final battle, the final boss battle. And Chong Li pulls out the white powder from inside his shorts and he throws the white powder in Van Damme's face, Frank Dukes. Throws it in his face, and then he does his typical thing that he does, is stereotypical, and then he's rubbing his eyes and he's blinded and he's getting beat up because he can't see. And then he's trying to figure out what to do. And then what does he do? He just calms himself, he calms his mind, he meditates, he flashes back to lessons he had with his teacher, and he remembers his training where he had been blindfolded and he had to defend himself from attacks while he was blindfolded. And he realized that was the key to his victory in this fight, was that he couldn't rely on his eyes. He had to rely on his inner sight. And when he was able to find that place and connect with it, then he became even more powerful, because he was blind, but he still could somehow see and see where the punches were coming at and see where the enemy was at and fight back. So after all these years, I realized Bloodsport has a shitload of wisdom in it. Watch that movie again. On top of that, one of the best soundtracks ever. Stan Bush. He's the guy that did that soundtrack. He's the king of 80s action movie soundtracks. He also did the song You Got the Touch from Transformers, which also later became part of the Boogie Nights soundtrack. Stan Bush. Can't talk about that guy enough. Where is he now? I don't know. But that guy just makes you, when you listen to his music, it just
makes you want to train for the Kumite. Makes you want to fight to survive. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening. That was episode 27 of
the Talk Like No One's Listening podcast. I'll catch you next time at the Kumite.